Hey everyone, this is Mr. Dunkel. Today we're going to be talking about how to make PowerPoint slides for a presentation. And Ms. McCall came across this presentation of giving some tips about things to do and not do, and it's pretty good. So I want to walk you through that and give you some ideas. So when you're making PowerPoint slides for presenting, one of the best things to do early on is have an outline. On your first slide or your second slide, have an outline that shows us what it is you're going to be talking about. So in this case, you can see our outline, and these are the different topics we're going to cover. So when you do that, it gives your audience an example of what they're going to be hearing. It helps you to kind of follow that order, and it keeps you in track. And when you make it, notice how we have only the main points here. There's not sentences, there's not long phrases. So just only place the main points on your outline, and then you can move forward. Now, in structuring your slides, the tips that we have here are really important, will help go a long way to having a good presentation. Try to avoid wordiness. Don't have big, long sentences. You know, keep your phrases short. Only about 4 or 5 points per slide maximum. Less than that's even better. When you're doing them, only use bullet points. Don't write in complete sentences. No one wants to read complete sentences during a presentation. And lastly, you want to, as you see here, it says use 1 to 2 slides per minute of your presentation. Basically, you want to be presenting more than what people can read. So you don't want to have a sentence or a paragraph on your slide, because if that's the case and all you're doing is reading what's on your slide, your audience already knows how to read. So they're going to tell you to just shut up and sit down. We'll just read your presentation. It makes for the worst presentations ever when students just stand there and read what's on their slide. So never, ever, ever do that. You want to keep your slide short with the information that's on there so that you, the presenter, can talk more. That's what makes you valuable. One of the best presenters ever was Steve Jobs, the owner or founder of Apple Computers. And oftentimes when he would give a presentation, all he would show behind him is a picture. And he would use the picture to give the audience something to look at, but then he talked, and that drew the attention to him, and he was able to talk about it. So what you want to do is avoid things like this. Here's a bad example, and you see we've got paragraph of full sentences. No one wants to read that, okay? So avoid that. Now, for slide structure, some people like to just show 1 point at a time, because when you show 1 point at a time, they can concentrate just on that point, so what you're saying. It will keep them from getting ahead. So if you're trying to reveal some points in succession, it keeps them from going ahead of you. Helps to keep you focused as well, because you're only going to be talking about 1 point at a time. Now, what you want to avoid are having distracting things on your slide. So distracting animations could be like this firework animated GIF at the bottom. It may just be how your words come on and off the screen. So if you're going to animate your words coming on, notice how that one disappeared by turning and spinning. And then our next one came up from the bottom. So what we recommend, if you are going to use an animation, be consistent with it. So whatever you choose, stick with it. You probably want to avoid the spinny, twisty stuff. Just have simple things like a slide on or a fade, and be consistent with every slide how you do that. Otherwise, they're going to be more concerned about guessing what your next transition is going to be rather than what it is you're talking about. And you don't want to have multiple points on the slide that are talking about different topics. Stick with your main points on that topic. As far as font size, if you're presenting on a projector, you need your font size for your main points to be at least a 44 point, because that will make it big enough to be seen from the back of the room. If you do have some like subheading parts or points underneath your main point, it's okay to go smaller, just don't go lower than 32. And try to use standard fonts. Times New Roman, Arial, both very easy to read. Georgia, there's some other ones, but just keep it something very simple to read. If you're using too small of a font, they're not going to be able to read it. Don't use capital letters for a whole sentence. Our brains read uppercase and lowercase faster than if we try to read an all capital sentence. Also, try to avoid script fonts and very cursive fonts. They're just too hard for your audience to read. Now, when you're picking color, make sure your font color contrasts with your background. So if you got a dark background, have a light font. If you have a light background, have a dark font. Okay. It's okay to use some color to emphasize a point, but do it sparingly. Don't do it very often. Here's some examples of some bad ones. We don't have a very good color contrast here. These words were just colored just for the sake of adding some decoration. That's kind of annoying when you do that. If you're going to color it for emphasis, that's one thing. In this situation, this next one where you have the pink and the red, we have a main point and kind of a sub point underneath that. If you're going to do that, keep your colors the same or like a lighter shade of it. So if you had pink here, maybe a lighter shade of pink, that will keep them connected visually, that they go together. And try to avoid this. And we see this every now and then where people are just trying to be creative. And it is very creative. And it looks great for about 2 seconds. And then after that, your audience is kind of tired with it. So don't do that. Backgrounds, you want to have good, solid kind of backgrounds. You don't want something very busy with a lot of polka dots or a lot of stripes, because it's going to be hard to read. If you're going to use light backgrounds, like I said, that's probably real simple, because then you can use dark text, but vice versa. You can use dark backgrounds and use light colored text. That's all right. And just be consistent. Whatever background you choose, stick with it. It's going to make your presentation seem more polished, like it all goes together. So don't change your backgrounds from slide to slide. Here's an example of really bad background with the rainbow. It's hard to read the text. We had a very distracting sound and image that came here that just throws off the audience. It really doesn't apply well. So try to avoid those kind of things. Graphs are great to use because they're visual. We'd much rather look at graphs than just read text, especially when we're looking at data. So whenever you do your graphs, always title them. Here's a bad example. There's no title. It's just very basic. It's just basically numbers. Okay. So you could jazz it up a little bit and make it into a more visual thing, but this is still kind of a bad example. And as you'll see here, some of the problems that we have with this, we got a lot of minor grid lines get in the way. The font's small. There's no title. Shading's distracting. So this is kind of hard to read, especially if you're in the back of the room, because of all these grid lines. Shading, like I said, it's distracting, too small a font. So if you did something like this instead, this is so much simpler. It's clean. It's easy to read. So, again, graphs are good. Just keep them kind of simple. Check for spelling and grammar. You don't want spelling mistakes. Don't reuse, repeat words. Check your grammar. Make sure it makes sense. Hopefully, if you're reading this, you could spot our spelling mistake, our use of repeated words, our grammar issue over on this third one. And regardless of whether English is your first language or not, have someone else look over your slides, because oftentimes they'll see things that maybe you didn't catch. So it's always a good idea. When you're concluding the end of your presentation, leave your audience with like a great stat, some revealing information, something that maybe surprises them at the end a little bit and sticks with them, something to think about, because that's really what they're going to carry with them as kind of your last words. It's always good to kind of summarize your main points. You might suggest some things people could do if they wanted to learn more. And then typically you'll want to end with a chance for questions. If you're giving a presentation, make sure your audience has the opportunity to ask you questions. You might have some sort of visual graphic or something at the end. Just try not to just end your presentation. Always, kind of, does anyone have any questions or something like that? And that makes for a great presentation. So those are the basics. We'll get into more detail later on some more tips. But if you can do just those basic things, you will make tremendously better slides for your presentations. So you're going to be making one here soon. So apply these techniques to what you're going to be making. If you have any questions, as always, don't hesitate to ask.